The shot rang out across the dusty street of Tucson, Arizona, and Miranda Zimmerman's world shattered into 1,000 pieces as her father crumpled to the wooden planks outside his assayer's office, blood pooling beneath him while 3 masked men stormed inside for the gold he had been safeguarding. It was August 1877, and the scorching desert heat seemed to freeze in that moment as Miranda screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos of shouting and gunfire. She tried to run to her father, but rough hands seized her from behind, yanking her backward with such force that her feet left the ground. "Got ourselves insurance, boys," the man holding her growled, his breath hot and rank against her ear. Through her tears, Miranda could see her father's assistant, Thomas, lying motionless near the safe. The 3 outlaws moved with practiced efficiency, stuffing leather saddlebags with gold bars and coin pouches while the entire town seemed to hold its breath in terror. "Please," Miranda gasped, struggling against the iron grip. "Let me go to him. Please, my father needs help." The man who appeared to be the leader turned toward her, his eyes cold and calculating above his bandana. "Your daddy's past helping, girl. But you're going to make sure we ride out of here without any trouble," he gestured to his companions. "Mount up. We ride north." Miranda's mind reeled as they dragged her toward the horses tied outside. She caught a glimpse of faces in windows, townspeople too frightened to intervene against armed desperados. Her father lay dying or dead in the street, and she could do nothing. The world blurred as they threw her onto a horse, the man who had first grabbed her swinging up behind her. She felt the horse lunge forward, and then they were galloping out of town, dust rising in clouds behind them. The man holding her reins was called Dutch, she learned, and his companions were Silas and a younger man named Pike. They rode hard for hours, pushing north through the desert scrubland, not stopping even as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Miranda's body ached, her throat was parched, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the anguish in her heart. Her father had raised her alone since her mother died of fever when Miranda was 12. For the past 8 years, it had been just the 2 of them, working together in his assayer's office, building a life in Tucson. Now, at 20 years old, she was alone and possibly an orphan being carried off by killers into the wilderness. They finally stopped as darkness fell, making camp in a rocky outcropping that provided some shelter. Dutch tied Miranda's hands in front of her, then pushed her down against a boulder. "Don't try running," he warned. "Rattlesnakes and scorpions out here will kill you faster than a bullet, and it won't be as merciful." Miranda stared at him with hatred burning in her chest. "You murdered my father." "Business," Dutch said with a shrug. "He shouldn't have gone for that scattergun. We just wanted the gold." "He was protecting what was entrusted to him," Miranda said, her voice shaking. "He was an honest man." "Honest men die poor," Silas commented, crouching by the small fire Pike was building. "Or they die protecting rich men's gold, which amounts to the same thing." The night was long and terrifying. Miranda dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, her wrists chafing against the rope. She thought of her father, wondered if he had survived, if anyone had gotten the doctor to him in time. But she had seen the blood, seen him fall, and deep in her heart, she knew he was gone. Tears slid down her cheeks in the darkness, silent and hot. Back in Tucson, Vaughn Crawford had been 3 miles out of town checking fence lines on the ranch where he worked when he heard the distant crack of gunfire. He had urged his horse into a gallop, his heart pounding with dread, arriving in town to find chaos and grief. Samuel Zimmerman lay on a makeshift stretcher, the doctor shaking his head gravely. Vaughn had known Samuel well. Everyone in Tucson knew the honest assayer and his daughter, Miranda, a bright young woman with dark hair and eyes that sparkled when she laughed. Vaughn pushed through the crowd, his tall frame and broad shoulders clearing a path. At 26, he had been working cattle drives and ranch work since he was 14, his face weathered and tanned from long days under the Arizona sun. "What happened?" he demanded, looking from face to face. "Outlaws," the sheriff said, an older man named Garrett who looked shaken. "3 of them. Shot Samuel when he tried to defend the gold shipment, killed his assistant too, and they took Miranda." Vaughn's blood ran cold. "Took her where?" "Rode north. We don't know where they're headed." Sheriff Garrett rubbed his face wearily. "I'm forming a posse, but tracking at night is near impossible. We'll head out at first light." Vaughn looked down at Samuel, saw the man's chest barely rising and falling, heard the rattling breath. The doctor met his eyes and gave a subtle shake of his head. Samuel Zimmerman would not see morning, and somewhere out in the desert night, Miranda was in the hands of killers. "I'm riding now," Vaughn said. "Crawford, be reasonable. You can't track in the dark." "I can try." Vaughn's jaw was set, his gray eyes hard. "Every hour they get further away is another hour she's in danger. I'm not waiting." He did not wait for permission. Vaughn went to the livery, got his horse fresh water and grain, checked his supplies, filled his canteen, and loaded his rifle. He had a bedroll, jerky, hardtack, and ammunition. It would have to be enough. As he rode out of Tucson, the last light was fading from the sky, and Samuel Zimmerman breathed his last breath surrounded by townspeople who had respected him. Vaughn had known Miranda since she was 16, when he had first come to Tucson looking for work. She had always been kind, always had a smile for him when he came into town. He had admired her from a distance, never quite finding the courage to speak beyond pleasantries, always feeling too rough, too uneducated for someone as refined as her. But admiration had deepened into something more over the years, something he had kept carefully hidden in his heart. Now she needed him, and he would not fail her. The tracking was indeed difficult in the darkness, but Vaughn was patient and skilled. He found hoofprints in the dust, broken brush, the signs of rapid passage. 3 horses, ridden hard, heading generally north. When dawn broke, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold, he was able to move faster, reading the trail more clearly. The outlaws had made no effort to hide their tracks, confident in their head start. Vaughn pushed his horse steadily, not recklessly. A lame horse would end his pursuit before it began, and this was clearly going to be a long chase. He stopped to water his mount at a small creek, letting the animal rest briefly while he studied the tracks. Perhaps 8 or 9 hours ahead of him now, maybe less. They had Miranda. The thought made his chest tighten with fear and anger. By midday on that second day, Miranda was exhausted, sunburned, and filled with a despair that threatened to overwhelm her. They had ridden hard all morning, Dutch occasionally letting her drink from a canteen but offering little else. Her hands were still bound, though now in front of her on her own horse, which she rode under Dutch's watchful eye. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "North," Dutch said unhelpfully. "Then east. Got a buyer for this gold waiting in New Mexico territory. Once we make the exchange, we might let you go." "Might?" Miranda's stomach twisted. Dutch looked at her appraisingly. "Depends on how much trouble you are. Pretty girl like you might be worth something herself." Miranda felt sick. She had heard stories of women sold into terrible situations along the frontier, forced into brothels or worse. "You'll hang for what you have done," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Only if we get caught," Silas said with a laugh. "And nobody's catching us, sweetheart. We're too smart, and we got too much of a lead." But someone was coming. Vaughn Crawford rode with the determination of a man possessed, stopping only when absolutely necessary, reading every sign the land offered him. He found their first camp, saw where Miranda had been sitting, saw the marks of her smaller boots in the dust. His jaw clenched. She was alive, and he was going to bring her home. Days blurred together. The outlaws pushed north through increasingly rough terrain, skirting around the mountains, following paths that seemed to lead nowhere. Miranda learned their patterns, learned that Pike was the youngest and seemed less comfortable with what they had done, while Silas was mean and enjoyed her fear. Dutch was the brains, cold and calculating, always planning their next move. On the fourth day, they crossed into high desert country, the landscape becoming more dramatic with red rock formations and scattered juniper trees. Miranda's clothes were filthy, her face burned by the sun despite the hat they had grudgingly given her. She had stopped crying, stopped pleading. Instead, a hard kernel of determination was forming in her chest. She would survive this. She would find a way to escape or to be rescued. She would not give up. Vaughn was closing the distance. He could tell by the freshness of the tracks, the warmth of ashes when he found their camps. Perhaps only a day behind them now, maybe less. He rode through a mountain pass as storm clouds gathered overhead, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. Rain would wash away the tracks, make following them nearly impossible. Cursing under his breath, Vaughn urged his horse faster, taking risks now that he would not have taken earlier. The storm broke with fury, thunder echoing off the canyon walls, lightning splitting the sky. Vaughn found shelter under an overhang, forced to wait it out, frustration eating at him. Every moment mattered. Every delay could mean Miranda's life. The outlaws had also taken shelter, huddled under a rocky ledge as rain poured down in sheets. Miranda was shivering, soaked through, her teeth chattering. Dutch had untied her hands so she could hold a blanket around herself, though he watched her carefully. There was nowhere for her to run, not in this storm. "We should have been in Santa Rosa by now," Pike muttered, his young face worried. "This delay is going to cause problems." "We'll make it," Dutch said. "Another 3 days, 4 at most. The buyer will wait. That much gold is worth waiting for." Miranda hugged the blanket tighter, her mind racing. 3 or 4 days. She had to last that long, had to find some way to slow them down or leave some sign for anyone who might be following. Did anyone follow? Would the sheriff have formed a posse? The likelihood seemed small. Her father was the only family she had, and while people in Tucson liked her, would they risk their lives to save her? She thought of Vaughn Crawford then, though she did not know why. He was always kind, always respectful when their paths crossed. She had caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read, something soft in his usually stern face. He was handsome in a rugged way, strong and capable, the kind of man the frontier forged. She had sometimes imagined what it might be like if he ever asked to court her properly, but those had been idle daydreams, and now seemed to belong to a different lifetime. The storm passed by evening, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet sage. They made camp, built a fire, and ate a meager meal of beans and hardtack. Miranda forced herself to eat, knowing she needed strength. Dutch tied her hands again before settling down to sleep, but the rope was slightly looser than before. She worked at it carefully through the night, trying to stretch the bonds without being obvious. Vaughn set out again at first light, his heart sinking when he saw how much the rain had obscured the trail. But he was experienced and patient, and he picked up signs here and there. A hoofprint in sheltered dust, a thread caught on a bush that looked like it came from a woman's dress, a disturbed patch of ground where horses had been tied. He was close now, very close. His hand rested on the rifle across his saddle, and his eyes scanned the horizon constantly. On the 6th day, Miranda's opportunity came. They had stopped at a small stream to water the horses, and Pike was the one watching her while Dutch and Silas scouted ahead for the best route through some rough terrain. Pike looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. "I am sorry," he said suddenly. "About your father, about all of this." Miranda looked at him carefully. He could not have been more than 19, with a soft face that had probably never grown a proper beard. "Then let me go," she said quietly. "I cannot. Dutch would kill me. Then help me escape, tonight when they are asleep. Just look the other way." Pike shook his head miserably. "He would track us both down. You don't know Dutch like I do. He is not someone you cross." "But you have a conscience," Miranda pressed. "I can see it. What happened in Tucson is eating at you. You did not sign up to murder innocent men and kidnap women." "It was not supposed to go like that," Pike said, his voice breaking slightly. "Dutch said it would be easy, just take the gold while the office was closed. But then your father was there, and everything went wrong." Miranda felt a flicker of hope. If she could turn Pike, could convince him to help her, she might have a chance. "It is not too late to do the right thing," she said. "Help me, please." But before Pike could respond, Dutch and Silas returned, and the moment was lost. They mounted up and rode on, and Miranda was left to wonder if she had planted a seed or simply wasted her breath. That night, as the outlaws slept, Miranda lay awake staring at the stars, working slowly at the ropes around her wrists. The knots were tight, but the rope had stretched slightly with wear and moisture. She thought of her father, of his smile and his laugh, of the way he had taught her to read ore samples and keep ledgers. She thought of the life she had expected to have, of eventually marrying, having children, building a future in Tucson. All of that was gone now, stolen by violence and greed. She would not let them steal her spirit too. Vaughn was barely a half-day behind them now. He had found their camp from the previous night, had seen where Miranda had sat, had found a small scrap of fabric that she had clearly torn from her hem and left tucked under a rock where it would not blow away. She was leaving signs for him. She knew someone was coming. The realization filled him with renewed determination and something else, something warm and fierce that went beyond simple duty or neighborly concern. On the 7th day, the outlaws began to relax slightly, confident they were far from any pursuit. They made better time, riding through high grassland country that was beautiful and harsh in equal measure. Miranda's hands were raw from working at the ropes, but she had made progress. Another night, maybe two, and she thought she might be able to slip free. "Pretty country," Silas commented, scanning the rolling hills. "Might settle down somewhere like this once we have our share of the gold." "You would be bored within a month," Dutch said. "Men like us are not made for settling." "Maybe," Silas allowed. "What about you, girl? You going to try settling after this? If we let you go?" Miranda did not answer, keeping her eyes forward. She had learned that engaging with Silas usually led nowhere good. He enjoyed trying to provoke fear or tears from her, and she refused to give him the satisfaction. "She will probably run straight to the law," Pike said quietly. "Tell them everything." "Probably," Dutch agreed. "Which is why we need to decide what we are doing with her before we reach Santa Rosa. Cannot have her identifying us to every lawman between here and Texas." The casual way they discussed her fate, as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a human being, made Miranda's blood run cold. She had known all along that they might kill her, but hearing it spoken aloud made it terrifyingly real. She had to escape. She had to. That night, they camped in a small valley with good grass for the horses and a spring for water. Dutch seemed in a better mood, perhaps because they were getting close to their destination. He even offered Miranda some of the dried apples from his pack, which she accepted gratefully, her stomach long past the point of allowing pride to interfere with hunger. "You have been cooperative," Dutch said, almost conversationally. Smart girl makes things easier. What choice do I have? Miranda said bitterly. None, Dutch agreed. That is the point. People who understand that are the ones who survive. After they had eaten and the fire had burned down to embers, Dutch tied Miranda to a tree this time, perhaps sensing something in her demeanor that made him cautious. She sat with her back against the rough bark, working at the ropes with renewed desperation. The knots were looser than ever, and finally, after what felt like hours, she felt one give way slightly. Her heart raced, just a little more. Vaughn Crawford approached their camp on foot, having left his horse tethered a quarter-mile back. He moved like a ghost through the darkness, his years of hunting and tracking making him sure-footed despite the rough ground. He could see the dying fire, could make out 3 sleeping forms in bedrolls, and then he saw Miranda tied to the tree, her head bowed, his heart clenched. She looked so small, so vulnerable. Rage at the men who had done this to her warred with the need to be smart, to be careful. 3 against 1 were bad odds, especially since he needed to get Miranda out safely. He could not just start shooting. He circled the camp silently, getting a feel for the layout, noting where the outlaws had placed their weapons, where the horses were picketed. A plan formed in his mind. It was risky, but everything about this situation was risky. He moved closer to where Miranda sat, carefully avoiding anything that might make noise. Miranda's eyes flew open as a hand gently covered her mouth. She started to struggle, panic flooding through her, but then she heard a whisper barely audible. It is me, Vaughn Crawford from Tucson. I'm here to help. Do not make a sound. She went still, her eyes wide in the darkness. Vaughn Crawford had tracked her all this way. Hope and disbelief flooded through her in equal measure. She felt him working at the ropes around her wrists, felt them fall away, and then he was helping her to her feet, one arm around her waist to support her shaking legs. They moved with agonizing slowness away from the camp, every step carefully placed. Miranda's heart hammered so hard she was sure it would wake the sleeping outlaws. They made it 20 feet, 30, and then her foot came down on a dry branch that snapped with a crack like a gunshot. What was that? Silas's voice, groggy but alarmed. Go, Vaughn hissed, and they ran. Behind them, shouts erupted as the outlaws realized their prisoner was escaping. Vaughn half carried Miranda toward where his horse was waiting, cursing the distance. Gunfire cracked through the night, bullets whining past them in the darkness. Vaughn pulled his revolver and fired back without looking, hoping to make them take cover more than actually hit anyone. They reached the horse, and Vaughn practically threw Miranda into the saddle before swinging up behind her. He dug his heels into the animal's flanks, and they lunged forward into a gallop. More gunfire behind them, but they were moving targets in the darkness now, much harder to hit. Hold on. Vaughn shouted, one arm tight around Miranda's waist as he guided the horse across the unfamiliar terrain by moonlight. It was insanely dangerous, but staying was certain death. They rode hard for perhaps 20 minutes before Vaughn slowed the horse to a fast walk, not wanting to lame the animal or have it step in a hole and break a leg. Behind them, he could hear pursuit, the sound of hooves and angry shouting. The outlaws were coming, and they were furious. We have to keep moving, Vaughn said, his voice urgent. They will not give up easily. That gold is worth a fortune, and now you can identify them. I know, Miranda gasped, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Vaughn, my father, I am so sorry, Miranda. He passed that first night. He tried to protect you, tried to stop them. She had known, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a blow. Tears streamed down her face as they rode through the night, and Vaughn's arm around her waist was the only thing keeping her in the saddle. They rode through the remainder of the night and into the dawn, Vaughn constantly checking behind them for signs of pursuit. He finally stopped in a narrow canyon where there was a spring and enough cover to hide them from casual observation. The horse was exhausted, foam flecked on its coat, and Vaughn knew they could not keep up this pace. He helped Miranda down, steadying her when her legs nearly gave out. She was sunburned, filthy, and clearly at the end of her endurance. "Rest," he said gently. "I will keep watch." "They will find us," Miranda said, her voice hollow. "Maybe," Vaughn allowed, "but I will not let them take you again. I promise you that." Miranda looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the rescue. His face was drawn with fatigue, his clothes covered in trail dust, but his gray eyes were steady and determined. He had ridden after her alone, had tracked her for a week through dangerous country, had risked his life to save her. The realization of what that meant, of the kind of man he was, struck her deeply. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you come alone?" Vaughn was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. "I could not stand the thought of you out here, afraid and alone. I could not wait for a posse that might never catch up. I just knew I had to find you. You could have been killed." "I still might be," Vaughn said with a slight, rueful smile, "but it would be worth it to know you are safe." Something in Miranda's chest, something that had been frozen and numb since her father's murder, began to thaw. She reached out and touched Vaughn's hand, feeling the calluses, the warmth of his skin. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Vaughn turned his hand to clasp hers gently. "Never," he said simply. They rested for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch. Vaughn shared his food and water with Miranda, insisting she take more than her share. She ate slowly, her stomach protesting after days of meager rations. The simple act of sitting still, of not being bound or watched by hostile eyes, felt like an impossible luxury. "We need to head east," Vaughn said as he studied the sun's position. "Work our way back to Tucson, but carefully. They will expect us to run straight home. We will take a longer route, stay off the main trails." "Will we make it?" Miranda asked. "Yes," Vaughn said with a confidence he did not entirely feel. "We will make it." They set out again in the afternoon, riding at a sustainable pace, Vaughn's experienced eye reading the land for good routes and potential ambush spots. He had enough supplies for perhaps 4 or 5 days if they were careful, and he estimated it would take at least that long to reach Tucson by the roundabout route he was planning. The outlaws were indeed searching for them. Dutch was in a cold fury, both at losing his insurance and at being outsmarted by a lone tracker. They split up to cover more ground, agreeing to fire shots if they found the trail. Dutch took the most likely route south while Silas searched to the east and Pike to the west. It was Pike who picked up their trail late that afternoon, finding hoofprints near a spring that looked recent. He stared at them for a long moment, his conscience warring with his fear of Dutch. Miranda's words echoed in his mind. It was not too late to do the right thing. But what was the right thing? If he led Dutch to them, Miranda would likely be killed and the man who had rescued her would die too. If he did not, Dutch would eventually realize Pike had withheld information, and Pike's own life would be forfeit. In the end, Pike made his choice. He carefully obscured the tracks with brush, then fired his gun twice into the air and rode off in the wrong direction. When Dutch and Silas found him, he claimed to have seen riders heading northwest. It was a lie that might buy Miranda and her rescuer some time, and it was the best Pike could do. He told himself it was enough, though his gut churned with fear. Vaughn and Miranda heard the distant gunshots and pushed their horse a little faster, knowing the outlaws were actively hunting them. They rode until full dark, finally stopping in a protected hollow where Vaughn judged it safe enough to risk a small fire. Miranda was swaying with exhaustion, and he knew she needed warm food and rest. He made coffee and heated beans, watching as Miranda ate mechanically, her eyes distant. She had been through hell, and the shock was starting to set in now that the immediate danger had eased slightly. When she had finished eating, she began to tremble, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. "Hey," Vaughn said softly, moving to sit beside her. "You are safe now, I have got you." "My father is dead," Miranda whispered. "He is gone, and I did not even get to say goodbye. I did not get to tell him I loved him one last time." "He knew," Vaughn said, his voice rough with emotion. "I saw how you two were together. He knew you loved him just like you knew he loved you. That does not go away just because there was no time for goodbyes." Miranda turned into Vaughn's chest, sobbing now, all the fear and grief and trauma of the past week pouring out of her. Vaughn wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, letting her cry, murmuring soothing words. His heart ached for her, for all she had lost, for the innocence and security that had been violently ripped away. Eventually, her sobs quieted to hiccups, and then to exhausted silence. She did not pull away from Vaughn's embrace, and he did not let go. They sat like that in the firelight, two people bound together by tragedy and survival. "You should sleep," Vaughn finally said. "We have another hard day tomorrow." "Will you stay close?" Miranda asked, her voice small. "I will be right here," Vaughn promised. "Nothing is going to hurt you while I am around." She believed him. Despite everything, despite the impossible odds and the danger still stalking them, she believed him completely. Miranda lay down on his bedroll, and Vaughn draped his coat over her as a blanket before settling nearby with his rifle across his lap, ready to stand watch through the night. The days began to blur together as they traveled steadily eastward. Vaughn was an expert woodsman and tracker, always finding water, always choosing routes that offered cover. They saw no sign of pursuit, and slowly, cautiously, Miranda began to hope they might actually make it. She also began to truly see Vaughn Crawford. Not as the quiet ranch hand she had exchanged pleasantries with in town, but as the remarkable man he was. He was patient and kind, always thinking of her comfort before his own. He was brave without being reckless, strong without being brutal. He told her stories as they rode to distract her from her grief and fear, stories of cattle drives and working on ranches, of growing up in Texas before drifting west. "Why did you come to Arizona?" Miranda asked one afternoon as they walked the horse to give the animal a rest. "Looking for something, I suppose," Vaughn said. "My father died when I was young, and my mother remarried a man who had no use for a stepson. I left as soon as I was old enough to make my own way. Been working ranches ever since, moving when the mood struck. Then I came to Tucson and decided to stay for a while." "Why did you stay?" Miranda asked, though she thought she might know the answer. Vaughn glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Found a reason to put down roots, maybe, or thought I might have anyway." Their eyes met, and Miranda felt her breath catch. There was so much in that look, so much unspoken feeling. She thought of all the times over the years when she had caught him watching her, the way he always seemed to find reasons to come to town when he had no real business there. He had stayed in Tucson because of her. The knowledge settled into her heart, warm and certain. "Vaughn," she began, but he shook his head. "Not now," he said gently. "Let us get you home safe first, then we can talk about other things." On the 9th day since her kidnapping and the 4th since her rescue, they crested a rise and saw familiar terrain spread out before them. They were perhaps 2 days from Tucson now, maybe less. Relief flooded through Miranda so intensely she felt dizzy. "Almost there," Vaughn said, and she could hear the relief in his voice too, but their luck ran out that afternoon. They had stopped at a creek to water the horse when shots rang out, bullets kicking up dirt near the water. Vaughn cursed and pulled Miranda behind a boulder, returning fire with his rifle. Dutch and Silas emerged from cover on the opposite bank, their faces twisted with rage. "Give us the girl and you can ride away," Dutch shouted. "This does not have to be your fight, Cowboy. Not a chance." Vaughn shouted back. He glanced at Miranda, saw the terror in her eyes. "Stay down," he told her. "Stay behind this rock no matter what happens. Vaughn, there are two of them, I know." His jaw was set, his eyes hard. "But I did not bring you this far to lose you now." The gunfight was brief and brutal. Vaughn was a good shot and had the advantage of better cover. He clipped Silas in the shoulder, sending the man sprawling with a howl of pain. Dutch fired back, his bullets spanging off the rock inches from Vaughn's head, showering them with stone chips. "You are a dead man," Dutch roared. Advancing with his gun blazing, Vaughn aimed carefully and fired. Dutch stumbled, grabbed his chest, and fell to his knees. For a moment he stayed like that, swaying, his expression one of disbelief. Then he toppled forward into the creek, the water running red around him. Silas, clutching his wounded shoulder, scrambled for his horse and managed to mount despite the injury. He galloped away without looking back, clearly deciding that no amount of gold was worth dying for. The sudden silence after the gunfire was deafening. Vaughn stayed behind cover for several minutes, making sure Silas was truly gone and that Dutch was not moving. Finally, he lowered his rifle and turned to Miranda. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak, staring at the body in the creek. Violence was not new to the frontier, but seeing a man killed before her eyes was still shocking. "I am sorry you had to see that," Vaughn said quietly, "but he would not have stopped. They would have hunted us all the way to Tucson if I had not ended it." "I know," Miranda whispered. "You saved my life. Again." They left that place quickly, not wanting to linger near death. Vaughn pushed them hard for the rest of the day, wanting to put as much distance between them and that creek as possible. When they finally made camp that night, they were both exhausted, but the atmosphere was different. The immediate danger had passed. They were truly going to make it home. "What happened to Pike?" Miranda asked as they sat by the fire. The third outlaw, he was younger, seemed less committed to what they were doing. "I do not know," Vaughn admitted. "He was not with the other two. Maybe he split off, took his share of the gold and ran. Or maybe he had second thoughts about the whole thing. He almost helped me escape once," Miranda said, "before you found us. He seemed genuinely sorry about what happened to my father." "Men make choices," Vaughn said. "Good or bad, we all have to live with them. Maybe he chose better than his partners in the end." In fact, Pike was riding hard for California, the saddlebags on his horse empty of gold but his conscience lighter than it had been in days. He had made his choice, and he hoped Miranda and her rescuer had made it to safety. It was the best he could do with the mess he had helped create. The next day they reached the outskirts of Tucson. Miranda felt a complex tangle of emotions as the familiar landscape came into view. Relief, yes, but also grief and loss. She was coming home, but to what? Her father was gone. The life she had known was over. What would she do now? Where would she go? As if reading her thoughts, Vaughn spoke. "You have friends in town, people who care about you. They will help you figure things out." "My father's a sayer business," Miranda said slowly. "I know how to run it. I helped him for years. Maybe I can take it over, keep it going." "That is a good idea," Vaughn said. "Your father would like that, knowing his work continued through you." They rode into Tucson in the late afternoon, and their arrival caused an immediate commotion. People came running, exclaiming in surprise and relief. Sheriff Garrett was there, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "I will be damned," he said. "We looked for 3 days and lost the trail. Figured they had gotten clean away. You tracked them all that way alone, Crawford. Yes, sir, Vaughn said, dismounting and helping Miranda down. She swayed slightly, and he kept a steadying hand on her arm. Where are they now, the outlaws? Dead or scattered, Vaughn said. One I killed in a gunfight about a day's ride from here. One wounded and ran. The third I do not know. They split up. The doctor came bustling up, insisting on examining Miranda despite her protests that she was fine. Women from the church gathered around her, offering sympathy and support, telling her about her father's funeral, about how worried everyone had been. It was overwhelming, and Miranda felt herself starting to shut down, unable to process it all. Vaughn saw it happening, saw her face go pale and her eyes glaze. He gently but firmly cleared a path through the crowd. She needs rest, he said. She has been through hell. Let her breathe. The doctor offered his home for Miranda to stay in until other arrangements could be made, since her house had been closed up after her father's death. Vaughn helped her there, staying until he was sure she was settled and cared for, and then reluctantly prepared to leave. Will you come back? Miranda asked, catching his hand. Tomorrow, if you want me to, Vaughn said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I want you to, Miranda said firmly. Something in Vaughn's chest eased, some tension he had been carrying since they arrived in town. Then I will be here. Get some rest, Miranda. You are safe now. Over the following days, Miranda began the painful process of rebuilding her life. She met with her father's lawyer, learned that the assayer business and their house were now hers, along with a modest sum of savings. The gold that had been stolen was recovered from Dutch's saddlebags, and the mining company it belonged to paid a reward that was split between Vaughn and the sheriff's office. Vaughn came to see her every day, helping with practical matters, just sitting with her when she needed company, giving her space when she needed to grieve alone. The townsfolk noticed, of course, and there was gentle speculation about the nature of their relationship. Vaughn had risked everything to save her. Miranda's eyes followed him whenever he was near. It was not hard to see which way the wind was blowing. 2 weeks after their return, Miranda went back to her house for the first time. Vaughn went with her, standing quietly nearby as she walked through rooms that still held her father's presence. His coat on the hook by the door, his pipe on the mantel, the book he had been reading, left open on the table as if he might return any moment to finish it. Miranda broke down crying in the middle of the parlor, and Vaughn was there, holding her as he had by the campfire that night in the wilderness. I miss him so much, she sobbed. This house feels so empty without him. I know, Vaughn said, his hand stroking her hair. I know it hurts. But it will get easier in time. The grief will not go away, but it will become something you can carry. How do you know? Miranda asked, pulling back to look at him through her tears. I lost my father when I was 10, Vaughn said. Lost my mother in everything but the physical sense when she chose her new husband over me. I know what loss feels like, Miranda. I know how it hollows you out. But I also know that life goes on, and that there can be joy again, even after terrible grief. You just have to give yourself permission to find it. Miranda studied his face, saw the old pain there, the scars of his own losses. They were alike in many ways, both shaped by tragedy, both stronger than they looked. You are a good man, Vaughn Crawford, she said softly. I am just a man, Vaughn said, but I am a man who cares about you very much. How much? Miranda asked, her heart suddenly racing. Vaughn was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching hers. Enough that I tracked you through dangerous country for a week. Enough that I would have died to protect you. Enough that the thought of you in danger made me half crazy. Enough that I have been in love with you for more than 2 years, though I never had the courage to say it before. Miranda's breath caught. Vaughn, I know this is not the right time, Vaughn said quickly. You are grieving, you have been through trauma, you need time to heal. I am not asking for anything, Miranda. I just wanted you to know the truth. I love you. I have loved you since the first time you smiled at me in your father's office and asked if I was new in town. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be here. Miranda felt tears sliding down her face again, but these were different tears. What if I am ready now? She whispered. What if I have been waiting for you to say something for years? What if being in that wilderness, thinking I might die without ever knowing what it was like to be loved by you, made me realize I do not want to wait anymore? Vaughn's eyes widened. Miranda, you are not thinking clearly. Everything that has happened has shown me exactly how short and precious life is, Miranda interrupted. My father died without warning. I could have died too. We never know how much time we have, Vaughn. Why waste it being cautious when we could be living? Because I do not want you to have regrets, Vaughn said, his voice rough. I do not want you to wake up in a month or a year and realize you only turned to me because I was there when you were vulnerable. Miranda reached up and cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I am not confused. I am not making a mistake. I am telling you that I love you too, Vaughn Crawford. I think I have loved you for a long time, but I was too afraid to acknowledge it, too worried about what people would say about the assayer's daughter and the ranch hand. But I do not care about any of that anymore. Life is too short and too uncertain. I love you. Vaughn's control broke. He pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss full of longing and relief and fierce joy. Miranda kissed him back just as intensely, her arms going around his neck, feeling safe and wanted and alive in a way she had not since before the nightmare began. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. Are you sure? He asked one more time. I have never been more sure of anything, Miranda said. They began courting properly after that, though most of Tucson figured they might as well already be engaged given what they had been through together. Vaughn was careful to respect Miranda's reputation, always making sure they were chaperoned, not staying too late when he visited. But their feelings were obvious to anyone who saw them together. They were two people who had found each other in the midst of tragedy and discovered something worth holding on to. Miranda reopened her father's assayer office 6 weeks after his death, and the business began to recover. She had a good reputation, and her father's clients trusted her skills. Vaughn continued working at the ranch, but he was in town more often than not, helping Miranda with heavy lifting and security, making sure she was safe. 3 months after her rescue, Vaughn asked her to marry him properly, going down on one knee in her parlor with a simple gold ring he had bought with his share of the reward money. Miranda said yes without hesitation, and they were married a month later in Tucson's small church, with half the town in attendance. Their first year of marriage was not easy. Miranda still had nightmares sometimes about her captivity, about her father's death. Vaughn was patient and understanding, always there to hold her when she woke gasping and afraid. He got a job as a deputy sheriff so he could be in town more often, using his tracking skills for legitimate law work. Miranda's business continued to grow, and between them, they built a life that was stable and good. On their first anniversary, Miranda discovered she was pregnant. Vaughn was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure, suddenly convinced that something would go wrong, that he would lose her. Women have babies every day, Miranda reminded him with amusement. I am strong and I have a good doctor. Everything will be fine. And it was. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy in the spring of 1879, and they named him Samuel, after her father. Vaughn cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the tiny, perfect life in his arms. Miranda watched her husband with their child and felt her heart might burst with love. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Vaughn proved to be an excellent deputy, respected by the townspeople for his integrity and skill. Miranda's assayer business thrived, and she hired an assistant so she could spend more time with Samuel. They bought a bigger house, one with room for a growing family. 2 years after Samuel was born, Miranda had a daughter they named Rose. Then another son, James, came along 2 years after that. Their house was full of noise and laughter, of children playing and learning, of love given freely and abundantly. Vaughn never forgot how close he had come to losing Miranda before they even had a chance to be together. Sometimes, when the children were asleep and they sat together on the porch watching the sunset over Tucson, he would take her hand and just hold it, marveling at the life they had built. "What are you thinking?" Miranda would ask, seeing the expression on his face. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Vaughn would say. "That somehow, out of all the terrible things that happened, we found each other, that we have this life, these children, this love. It feels like a miracle sometimes." "It was not all miracle," Miranda would remind him. "You rode after me when no one else did. You tracked me through the wilderness. You saved my life, Vaughn. Everything we have now started because you refused to give up." "We saved each other," Vaughn would correct. "You gave me a reason to be brave. You gave me something to fight for. I was just drifting before I met you, Miranda. You made me want to be better, to be the kind of man who deserved you." "You always were that man," Miranda would say, leaning against his shoulder. "I just had to wait for you to realize it." Pike, the third outlaw who had let them escape, never returned to a life of crime. He settled in California under a different name, working as a ranch hand and trying to make peace with his past. Sometimes he wondered what had happened to Miranda and the man who rescued her, and he hoped they had found happiness. It was the least they deserved after what he had helped put them through. Silas, wounded and bitter, died in a bar fight in New Mexico 2 years after the robbery, his share of the gold long since squandered on whiskey and cards. He died alone and unmourned, the end that comes to men who choose violence over compassion. But Vaughn and Miranda chose differently. They chose love and family and building something good in a harsh land. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, of the dramatic rescue and the long ride home, of the love that grew from tragedy. Samuel, their oldest, became a lawyer, using his intelligence and his parents' values to fight for justice. Rose became a teacher, passionate about education and helping children. James followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a lawman known for his tracking skills and his dedication to protecting others. Vaughn and Miranda grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with age but still reaching for each other every morning when they woke. They saw Tucson grow from a rough frontier town into a proper city. They saw the railroad come through, bringing change and opportunity. They saw their children marry and have children of their own, filling their lives with grandchildren who brought fresh joy. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by family, Vaughn stood and raised his glass. "I want to thank my wife," he said, his voice still strong despite his 70 years, "for being the bravest woman I have ever known, for loving me even when I was just a rough ranch hand with nothing to offer but a loyal heart, for building this life with me, for giving me these children and grandchildren, for being my partner through everything. I tracked you through the wilderness 40 years ago, Miranda, and I would do it again 1,000 times over to have the life we have shared." Miranda rose and kissed him, her eyes bright with tears. "And I would wait for you every time," she said. "You are the love of my life, Vaughn Crawford, my rescuer, my husband, my best friend. Everything good in my life comes back to you." Their family cheered, and the celebration went on late into the night, full of food and music and laughter. When everyone had finally gone home and Vaughn and Miranda were alone in their room, they lay in bed as they had 1,000 times before, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Do you ever think about that time?" Miranda asked quietly. "About what happened, about how terrified we were, sometimes," Vaughn admitted. "But mostly I think about what came after, about how we turned something terrible into something beautiful. We did not let the violence and the fear win, Miranda. We chose love instead, and that made all the difference." "I am glad you came after me," Miranda whispered. "I will always come after you," Vaughn said, kissing her forehead, "in this life and whatever comes next. You are mine, and I am yours, and nothing will ever change that." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, their hearts beating in sync after 40 years of marriage. The desert night was quiet around their house, peaceful and safe, a far cry from those desperate days in the wilderness when survival was uncertain and the future was a question mark. But they had made it. They had built a life worth living, had raised children who would carry their values forward, had loved each other with a depth and constancy that transformed them both. The outlaw had taken Miranda hostage for gold, but Vaughn had tracked them for weeks and brought her back. And in doing so, he had brought them both to a future neither could have imagined. A future full of love and family and quiet contentment. A future earned through bravery and persistence, and refusing to give up on each other. It was a legacy they were proud of, a story they would tell their grandchildren, a testament to the power of love to triumph over even the darkest circumstances. The Wild West had been harsh and unforgiving, but within it, two people had found each other and created something that would last long after they were gone. Years later, when they were both in their 80s, Vaughn developed a persistent cough that the doctor could not cure. He grew weaker over the course of a winter, and by spring it was clear he did not have much time left. Miranda never left his side, holding his hand, telling him stories of their life together, reminding him of all the beautiful moments they had shared. "I am not afraid," Vaughn told her one quiet evening, his voice thin but steady. "I have had a good life, Miranda, better than I ever dreamed possible. You gave that to me." "We gave it to each other," Miranda said, tears sliding down her lined face. "Promise me something," Vaughn said. "Promise me you will not grieve too long. You have so much life left in you still. Spend it with our children and grandchildren. Be happy." "I will always miss you," Miranda said. "I know, and I will be waiting for you wherever we go next." Vaughn smiled, that same gentle smile that had first captured her heart so many years ago. "But there is no rush. Live, Miranda, live well and know that I love you with every piece of my soul." He died that night peacefully with Miranda's hand in his and their children gathered around. The whole town turned out for his funeral, honoring a man who had been a hero, a husband, a father, and a friend. Miranda stood at his graveside, straight-backed and dignified despite her broken heart, and watched as they lowered him into the earth. She lived another 7 years after Vaughn's death. Years spent with family, years of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren be born. She kept her promise to him, living well, finding joy where she could. But there was always a part of her that waited, that looked forward to the day when she would see him again. When Miranda finally passed away in her sleep at the age of 91, her children gathered to go through her things. They found letters Vaughn had written her over the years, love notes and poems that showed the depth of his feeling. They found the simple gold ring he had given her, worn thin from a lifetime of wear. And they found her diary, filled with entries about their life together, about the rescue that had brought them together, about the love that had sustained them through everything. The final entry, written the night before she died, simply said, "I am ready now. I have lived the life Vaughn asked me to live. I have loved our children and seen them thrive. I have honored his memory by being happy. But now it is time to go home, time to find him again, time to continue the story that started in the Arizona desert all those years ago. I am not afraid. I am ready." They buried her next to Vaughn, their gravestones side by side, the inscription simple but meaningful. Vaughn's read, "Beloved husband, father, and hero, he gave his heart completely." Miranda's read, "Beloved wife, mother, and survivor, she loved with her whole soul." And in Tucson, for generations after, people would tell the story of Vaughn Crawford and Miranda Zimmerman. The story of the outlaw who took her hostage for the gold, the cowboy who tracked them for weeks to bring her back, and the love that grew from tragedy and changed two lives forever. It became part of the town's history, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and love can prevail. That sometimes the worst things lead to the best things. That two people, against all odds, can find each other and build something that lasts far beyond their own lifetimes. Their great-grandchildren would visit those twin graves and place flowers there, honoring the couple who had started it all. The love story that had become legend, the rescue that had become romance. The two people who had refused to let violence and fear define their story, choosing instead to write their own ending. An ending full of love and family, and a lifetime of quiet happiness, earned through courage and devotion, and the simple determination to never give up on each other. The Wild West had been harsh, but it had also been a place where extraordinary things could happen, where a ranch hand could become a hero, where a woman could survive the impossible, where two people could find each other in the midst of chaos and build a love that would echo through generations. That was the true story of Vaughn and Miranda, and it was a story their family would tell with pride for 100 years and more.